In this episode of The Active Code, Paul and I speak to Dan Wilson and Alex Ogden. Dan and Alex share the amazing work they do, what the Creating Active Scores framework is, the research that underpins CAS, and how organisations can collaborate through the CAS programme to create active scores and encourage active lifestyles. Enjoy the pod.
Hi and welcome to the Active Code podcast, brought to you by Aspire Active Partnerships. I'm Paul Griffiths, and joining me each week on the pod is Luke Johnson.
Aspire Active Partnerships is a community of like-minded business leaders who all believe that collaboration in the sports coaching and children's activity sector is essential for success. We've proven that working in collaboration does benefit business growth and essentially helps more children be more active more often.
To combat physical inactivity, we need organisations that are performing at their very best. Organisations will only operate to high standards if they are led well. So, if we can focus on developing high quality leaders throughout an organisation, not just at the top, customers will experience higher quality services, which means heightened enjoyment levels and increased levels of physical activity. And if we do this at an early age, we know that we can build the foundations for a more active, happier and healthier life. The Active Code investigates what it really takes to be a successful leader and how organisations can combat physical inactivity.
We won't be alone through this journey. We are joined by business owners and experts from our sector, as well as inspirational people from outside our industry. We'll understand the importance of physical activity to our guests, reflect on leadership experiences, and gain thought-provoking insights on how we can crack the Active Code and get more children more active more often. If you like what you hear, please leave us a rating and subscribe.
Dan and Alex, welcome to the Active Code podcast. It's great to have you with us. Morning.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation. Lovely to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you both on the pod for this episode. Dan, can I come straight back to you and ask you to share your, professional journey so far?
Yeah, no problem. I started off after leaving university, went straight into teaching. Was a primary school teacher for a number of years, specialising in PE. And as most primary PE teachers get lumbered with all of the extracurricular fixtures and tidying of the store cupboard and all the other fun and games that come with being a PE teacher. And then I moved to work for the local authority as a PE curriculum consultant. So working with schools around London to improve their provision of PE and linking that into broader school strategies and policies. And now I work as a director at Yorkshire Sport Foundation, which is far broader than the schools work, but it's fascinating seeing how everything going on in schools links with communities, active design and workforce, people and skills, and the whole broader piece. So it's a fascinating role.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dan. And then across to you, Alex.
Yeah, I suppose my journey's been fairly similar to Dan's, really, in that I qualified as a teacher in primary school settings in my mid-20s, and then taught as a primary school teacher for around 13 years in schools in Leeds and Bradford. And then in my final year, I led PE, school sport and physical activity as a middle leader during that time. So very much found my passion as a teacher within physical education. And then in my final year as a full-time teacher, I piloted a whole school active learning approach because we felt it was something that would really benefit our pupils at the time in terms of their learning and their engagement and their concentration. So I supported the teachers I was working with for a full year to develop active learning approaches in the classroom. And that, due to the success and the impact of that led me to make probably a bold decision at the time to leave full-time teaching and become a self-employed education consultant, specifically around physically active learning. So for 2.5, 3 years, traveled the country supporting head teachers and senior leaders in schools nationwide, really, to embed a whole school culture around physically active learning, delivering kind of workshops and CPD to schools. And then very fortunately came to a bit of a crossroads just before COVID, really, that I felt that I maybe a bit too many times on the road, too many motels outside some random places with young kids at home. I thought it's probably best to jump back into kind of full-time employment closer to home. Then, very fortunately, just before schools locked down, which would have been a real interesting time for me if I hadn't landed the job at Yorkshire Sport Foundation, applied for the education manager at Yorkshire Sport Foundation to work underneath Dan. And here I am now, 3 years into this role, supporting schools in West Yorkshire and South Yorkshire, and local authorities and local partners to work with schools around PE, sport, physical activity, and to embed physical activity before, during, and beyond the school day. So that's my role now.
That's great. Thanks both for sharing that. I think probably going to be pretty obvious given the background you've got, but as we venture into physical activity, and you understand and have clearly seen the impact that activity has on children and young people. But what does physical activity mean to you, Dan?
A wealth of things. I think I've always been active. I loved playing sport when I was a kid, mainly football and athletics. And then growing up through university, and then when I started my job, it's mainly the social benefits I get out of it. There was a time when I was a very competitive runner, and I've done triathlons and marathons and things, and that was probably when I didn't have much else in my life to worry me about. But since getting a more responsible job and having a young family, it's the social benefits, I think, of sport that it really means to me. And I've seen it with my kids. I've got 2 young children, and my son plays football for a very inclusive club. And although he's pretty decent, his love of sport comes from his ability to interact and engage and play with his friends on a Saturday morning and on a Monday night. And same with my daughter, dances every night of the week. But the most rewarding part of that is not any of the particular competitions that she wins, but she's recently been made team captain. The qualities of a team captain around, self-esteem and team building and being able to communicate with her peers, that's the value that I think sport means to me personally.
How about yourself, Alex?
Yeah, I would certainly echo Dan's comments. I think I was very fortunate when I was younger to be exposed to many broad and varied sports and non-traditional activities due to the school that I attended. So I, from a very young age, would be just saying, "Mom, I'm going out," close the door behind me, and off I go for a few hours within maybe a mile radius with my friends, socializing, coming up with lots of different creative kind of games on the street with or without equipment that we could find. And then that was reinforced through schooling, really, in terms of the opportunities that were given to me there. So there wasn't really a sport or activity that I didn't try at some point when I was younger. And I think that supported me to find my joy in movement. And I think when I think of what I want to instill into my children is to, whatever that movement looks like, whatever that activity looks like, just find your joy. And to nick a quote from the great Margaret Whitehead at the recent Sport England launch for the new physical literacy statement, she very profoundly said during that launch, "Why do we teach children to jump and not jump for joy?" So that's my philosophy, really, not only with schools that I'm working with and that message that I want to spread, but also for my own children too. So, yeah, the wider benefits of physical activity, the impact on your being, your mood. And I know certainly now that's why I take part in physical activities, because those happy chemicals it gives me and that chance to think things through, particularly on a run and things like that. So, yeah.
And Alex, do you stay active now? Obviously, you talked about when you're younger, you're out and about in the local area with friends. How do you keep active at the moment?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think it's an ever-changing journey, I think, with myself and physical activity in that, yes, I am active now, and I'm active in very different ways than I was when I was younger. Because as we know, as we get older and responsibilities are increased, be it jobs and families, life can just get in the way. And not to keep banging the physical literacy drum, but the new statement around the physical literacy being our relationship with movement, that relationship can be positive and negative. It can go up and down. I am active now. I do try to run as regularly as I can. I play a bit of paddle and a bit of five-a-side football, which again, going back to what Dan was saying, is very much driven by the chance to socialize with friends and that camaraderie. But yeah, that's me.
And Dan, do you still get out on your long runs?
Not as much as I used to. Unfortunately, my back and my calves and pretty much every niggle that I've got going have let me down over the last few years. But wherever possible, I go out on my bike for a ride on a Sunday morning, go for long walks with the family. The kids are still trying to get me to go out running with them, which I manage to find excuses for most of the time. But I think as I move into my middle age, it's largely going to be taken up on the golf course, I think. I've been very kindly bought a load of golf lessons by the team at Yorkshire Sport Foundation, so I'll be putting those to good use in the new year, I think, and using it as an opportunity to broaden my sporting horizons.
Yeah, brilliant, excellent. Just in terms of the benefits then, Alex, just over to you. So if you weren't able to get out to play some paddle or five-a-sides during a week, what kind of negatives do you feel, if that makes sense? So in your work and life, if you're not able to be physically active, are there negative sides to that?
There absolutely are. And in all honesty, full transparency, that probably didn't come to light until maybe in the past few years, 5 or so years, when I began to recognize the effect of not moving it could have on myself, on my mental health. And I'm not really talking about physical health here. I'm mainly talking about mental health. And if I'm particularly feeling maybe a little bit tired or a little bit down in the dumps on one day, one of the first questions I tend to ask myself is, when did I last move vigorously? And more often than not, there's a correlation there. And my answer would probably be a few days ago or last week, certainly not in the last 24 to 48 hours. So not only do I know when I've been active, if I have gone out for a run or I've just stepped off 40 minutes on the five-a-side pitch, whatever it might be, I instantly feeling revitalized. But I certainly know now that if I am feeling particularly low or anxious, then that's normally linked to the fact that I've not moved in the past few days. And that's the message that I try to, certainly when I was working with schools around physical active learning, is actually communicating those messages to children is so important that they actually understand that when they are sat down in a lesson and they begin to feel tired after half an hour, that's because those brain cells is almost a bit like a battery. It's filling up and we become tired and we need that release. And so when they move, all of a sudden that release is let go. So it's really important that we also communicate those messages to children, get them to truly understand that too, particularly for behavior change and why it's important to move.
Yeah, I completely resonate with you on that, Alex. It's so easy, I think, especially with young kids. We've all got young children, so quite easy to get into the habit, isn't it, of not actually moving because we've got other things to do and we've got work then to get on with, and you get home and you think, oh, geez, I'm too tired. I've had a long day. I've got a little bit more work to pick up. Got some emails to check. So I think actually forcing yourself to do it. And I've never been a morning person ever, but since having children, I've had to be, because that's the only time of the day that I can move. So I've found now that actually getting up and forcing myself to do that becomes a habit, and it definitely helps with my day. So, and it's something as a team as well within Aspire that we encourage people. Like every Monday we have a team meeting, and one of the very first questions we ask is, first of all, how's your weekend? Second question, how active have you been in the last week? And as soon as we're positioning that to people, it's amazing how quickly people start to think, hang on a minute, out of the 12 people on this call, I only one or two that hasn't moved much in the last week. I don't want to do that again in the next week. So it's been really useful actually to see that people are starting to actually do a little bit more, which is really important. And as you said there as well about the importance of creating active schools and understanding of getting children to understand the importance of movement. I'm guessing as parents that we're all encouraging our kids to be active and participate in sports, as Dan mentioned. But I'm sure you also get a backlash. It might just be my parenting of, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that. However, they go off to school and they do whatever the teachers tell them to do. So from creating active schools, if we venture into that now for this pod and really dive a bit deeper on creating active schools and what that is all about. Let's just start with that really. What is creating active schools?
Actually, that's a really good segue into where creating active schools came from, because it was a conversation that was had about 4 or 5 years ago between myself at the Active Partnership, Yorkshire Sport Foundation, a colleague, Andy Daly-Smith at Leeds Beckett University, and another colleague, Nicola Corrigan at Public Health covering Yorkshire. And we'd put on lots of PE conferences over the years, and we'd got lots of excited teachers and colleagues from coaching companies with fantastic ideas and innovations and interventions that they'd learned through the conferences. And then they'd go back to school and they'd knock on the head teacher's door, suggest some of these ideas, to usually be rebuffed with, oh, actually, we haven't got the money to do that, or we haven't got the time or the capacity or the capability to go and do that initiative. Great idea, but let's concentrate on English, maths and science. So we thought, how do we change the system so that it's not down to the really motivated PE subject leaders to do all the work for them? We need to think about the system as a whole isn't set up to help young people to be active in schools. As Alex said, kids are sat behind their desks all day, every day. It's not an environment that encourages physical activity. You look at a playground during break times and it's often dominated by a group of lads kicking a ball around, unless there's some kind of intervention to prevent that. And then when you prevent the ball on the playground, you're sending out the wrong messages. So there's something wrong across the whole system of how education is set up. So between the three of us, we decided to do a little bit of research, bring about 50 stakeholders together over 2 days in Leeds, and really pick their brains, real experts across the system of head teachers, education consultants, colleagues from AFP, YST, Active Partnerships, the lot, all came together and really did a deep dive into what are the challenges in terms of PE and sport and physical activity in schools, and then where are the facilitators, where are the gaps, what can we do to make schools more active. And after those 2 days of really working hard to pull together all of our ideas, we came up with a framework. Lots of revisions, lots of refining, lots of conversations about best fits and do we include that and exclude that. And ultimately, we settled on what we've called the Creating Active Schools framework. The research that we did was written up and it's been published in an article that you can look for and download and use the framework. And we advocate all schools and colleagues across the sector to really start thinking about how they use the framework, which really does advocate for PE, school sport, physical activity to be embedded at the heart of school culture, ethos and policy. And that starts with the school leaders. So it's about changing our perspective. Instead of seeing sport through the lens of a PE teacher or a coach in terms of those physical skills it brings, and obviously they're really important, it's shifting those messages about how would a school leader see the priorities across the school. And as a governor myself, the chair of governors at a school in North Yorkshire, those strategic conversations are often around safeguarding, around budgets, around planning and policy and curriculum. So it's how do we align sport, physical activity to be embedded at a real strategic level in schools so that it's not just an intervention that just happens for a short amount of time and becomes a flash in the pan. Actually, being active is embedded in the culture of a school, and it's talked about in a positive way in staff meetings and lesson planning and conversations regularly with parents and kids and the whole state, all the stakeholders across the school. So that's where we think CAS is doing different things to anything that we've seen before. And we've had some great responses and interactions from schools across the country that have been using it.
And you mentioned there about the insights from experts, teachers, PE leads, consultants, AFP, YST, etc. Did that group of people also include the people that are struggling to understand the importance of embedding activity as the underbelly in the school? Is that the cultural side of things? I think it's amazing. The Creating Active Schools framework is brilliant, and every school in the country should be adapting it and utilising it going forwards. However, you've mentioned that the barriers are it comes from the top, doesn't it? It's a leadership thing in most schools. So did that room of people also include the challenging head teachers who don't see activity as a positive driver for good?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And that was from our thinking. And often a lot of our interactions are with the low-hanging fruit, the people that get it, the ones that are already on board with this. They're the easy ones to share this messaging with. Fundamental to this piece of work, it was working with school leaders that might be cynical about some of these approaches, or every head teacher will understand the importance of well-being and being active in sport for children. It doesn't necessarily mean they prioritize it, because they've got 1,000,001 other things to prioritize, depending on what day of the week it is usually. But we made it absolutely clear that we wanted some real challenge across the whole process, challenge us to think differently, challenge us to understand what other priorities there are in schools and why sport and physical activity hasn't been as highly prioritized as it really should be. And there were some really good challenges in there. Schools saying we're expecting an inspection, an Ofsted inspection imminently. We don't want our kids to be seen to be up and moving, and the traditional approach might be seen as kids sat behind their desks and learning is what we want to advocate, and an inspector might expect to see that. It'll be a bit of a challenge for us to advocate for our staff to get the kids moving around the classroom and engaging in active learning when there's an inspection taking place. So those were all really good challenges to us to think, actually, how do we get that culture into schools? How do we make teachers understand that it's important? It improves behaviour, improves concentration, it improves memory retention. All those things that teachers should be embedding into good pedagogy, you can get through a well-organised physical activity, active learning intervention. And again, we've got to do a lot of work. A lot of our work at the Active Partnership is with national level, with the Department for Education we're talking to regularly, through Sport England, around how do we change the whole system so that this is really advocated and put out in policy papers and guidance for teachers in schools as to this is what we should be doing. And at one point in the future, we hope to influence Ofsted, but we're not quite there yet.
Yeah, but you've got to bang the drum, haven't you? You've got to do it at both levels. As you said there, you've got to go in at the ground level with schools, and you've also got to start those more strategic conversations with the powers that be. Just interestingly, Dal, I think we talk about this a fair bit on the podcast with all sorts of organisations, and it's the key is understanding the audience. And quite often, people in organisations have an idea and they want to run with it because they think it's a good idea, or there's a group of people that think it's a good idea. But really understanding the audience or the customers is so important. But at the same time, as you just explained, don't just go to the people that you think are going to say, that's a good idea, let's do that. You've got to get a breadth of opinions and information and people challenging you. And that's crucial. No matter who you are, what you're doing.
On that point, that's a really good point. And just something as maybe a little bit of a tip that we advise. When our colleagues are going into schools talking about CAS, the real thing there, I think, is to do their research before they go into school and understand what the school's context is and what their own challenges are. But then when they're talking to the leaders, to listen first, spend the first 20 minutes, half an hour, just listening to the school. What are your challenges? What are your priorities? And then while that talking is going on, to align what you want to advocate to what their challenges and priorities are. So it might be you go into a school and they're saying, oh, reading in Key Stage 1 is terrible, and we're really focusing in on that over the next few years. Brilliant. We know that we can align some cultural changes so that kids are active when they're moving, or that when they're reading, or that we can find some text that are more aligned to sport, and that will engage them because they love football. All these kind of proactively think as you're going along, but while you're listening and respond to what you're being told, rather than, as you said, go in with an idea and this is what I'm going to tell you and this is what we're going to do. You can't do it that way.
Yeah. It's not the,
And I think, sorry to jump in there, and I think also at individual school level, we don't do that enough with the children and the parents either. Particularly around physical activity, we'll think, okay, we're going to introduce this new initiative, or we're going to ask this piece of provision on this day, and then might communicate to parents to say, oh, can you bring in this for this day? And it often comes out the blue, and then we're having to kind of firefight against maybe some, but why do I have to do that? Or, oh, that's a bit of an inconvenience, when actually, if we do co-design and consult in that first instance with pupils and parents, and many of those that we might feel that might put up the barriers to it, it's going to integrate physical activity provision much more seamlessly, and it's going to have a bigger impact moving forward. So just at an individual school level as well, I think we need to do that.
Yeah,
more.
100%. Again, it comes back down to, for me, that's Dan explained there is the perfect sale. From an organizational perspective, if you go to any business and talk about a sales process, for me, though, the businesses that get it right are those that listen to the prospective customer. They don't go in and, who likes looking for a sofa, and you walk into a sofa place and someone's on you straight away saying, do you like this? Do you want to sit on this? You can have it for this much money and we'll do it on credit. And you're just like, hang on a minute. You've not even asked me any questions. So actually listening to our audience, no matter who it is just mega important, really important.
In terms of those initial conversations with the many stakeholders you referenced, and you're saying that if we take this approach on, we're going to see improved concentration, less behavior issues, increased learning opportunities. What type of research took place to help you justify that reasoning, or the framework to those stakeholders initially?
One of the strengths, I think, of the Creating Active Schools approach is that it is all built on research, strong, robust research and evidence. So we work really closely with the University of Bradford and several other universities across the country to make sure that whatever we develop has strong foundations in research. Any of the implementation models we're working on and advising are monitored and evaluated and fed back. So a lot of our early work came in Bradford, working with the Sport England funded local delivery pilot there called Jump, Join Us, Move, Play. And we started working in around 15 schools to understand different approaches to embedding the CAS framework approach. And we tried various different models, and we evaluated all of them, and we took the strengths, the best bits, and we started to work on an implementation model that fits best for schools around that kind of starting off with a bit of a profiling operation where you look at the current school strengths and their gaps, and then that's aligned to an action plan to identify over the next few months or years where we need to embed physical activity better, and then to understand what training in CPD maybe needs to be done locally to facilitate that improvement journey. So some really good early learning around what some of the barriers and challenges to the work are. Some really good learning around actually some of the biggest barriers around the social environment within schools. As I was saying, many times you do a learning walk, and if kids are active and moving around the classroom, it's frowned upon. How do we overcome that? And some other really interesting insights that have come that actually anyone can look on the Join Us Move Play website and find the initial early evaluations of CAS. But then that's since been evolved. some of Alex's work has been broader across Yorkshire and nationally. I don't know, Alex, if you're able to share some of the learning that you've been picking up more recently.
Yes. So one of my first priorities when I came into the Yorkshire Sport Foundation in March 2020 was to obviously build on the learning and the research that's taken place in Bradford previous to me joining the organisation. Obviously, during COVID times, that was very difficult because schools had closed. But I very much wanted to engage and broaden those schools that are engaging with the Creating Active Schools framework and implementing it. So that led to a project over a bit of a pilot, really, regional pilot that involved 11 schools, so fairly small. There's something within my capacity because I was that external support and that CAS champion to go in and support the schools to implement the framework. So we kickstarted an 11 school pilot with schools covering Leeds and Doncaster and Sheffield areas and Rotherham too. All based within kind of focus communities that we work with here at Yorkshire Sport Foundation. So in those kind of areas that really need it the most and quite high levels of deprivation, as you can imagine. And with that kind of comes significant kind of barriers and challenges, whether it's the actual individual school setting and the physical environment and the facilities that they have, or whether it's demographical challenges around cultures and things like that. So that led to a really kind of years worth of quite intense work with them, and we commissioned an evaluation team to capture the learning along the way. And in terms of those findings during that pilot, it not only reinforced what was found in Bradford, but threw up a few other new ones too. In terms of those key components of successful implementation, there were many things being highlighted. Obviously, that senior leadership team support, not only at policy level, but at delivery level too, within the school, where it was something that came out. An absolutely key one was the knowledge and understanding. So when we think about building the capability across all stakeholders within a school, that knowledge and understanding of the why, whether they are a teacher, a lunchtime supervisor, a child, a parent, a governor, that capability and that knowledge and understanding of why we are embedding physical activity as part of our culture and ethos and the impact it's going to have is so important. And we saw greater impacts and accelerated implementation and progress in schools where that stakeholder engagement around the why was stronger. Really quick wins as well. And it doesn't sound like rocket science, does it? But particularly around those schools that prioritized physically active learning and embedding whole school approaches and setting the expectation at policy level and changing environments to all support an active curriculum. Those kind of quick wins, those little tiny habits that could be implemented and run with fairly quickly and easily and feasibly, but could also have a huge impact on activity levels and learning behaviors, was really important. And because they break down those often pushbacks from teachers, understandably, around time. Where do I find the time to do this? I'm already packed curriculum. I don't have the time. So those kind of little tiny habits and quick wins were really important in those schools within that pilot. And then also the understanding that CAS is a different approach to what we've currently seen within the system around peace, school sport and physical activity. This is whole school improvement around physical activity. This is driving whole school improvement through physical activity. This is continuous professional development. And I think when schools really understand that it's not just, we do this for a few months and then it's a tick box, we've done it, and it might lead to an accreditation or something like that. I think it's really important that schools know from the outset that this is continuous improvement. And that came through really strong in that regional pilot.
And Alex, you mentioned some of the quick wins, some of the strategies, and teachers maybe adapting their existing practice to fit in more of an active curriculum or day. So from the schools that you did work with who did adopt the approach, What would a typical day look like in one of those schools? What would lessons look like? What would break time look like? That type of thing.
Sure. I guess it's important to say at this point that obviously active curriculum, or should we say in terms of actually referencing the framework specifically, curriculum lessons that aren't PE, that's obviously one opportunity area that exists within the framework. And schools would come to the conclusion or select that as a potential priority based on the profile analysis that they do using the CAS tool. And so they come to that decision that we want to focus on physically active learning across the curriculum. And then let's look upwards at the framework. What does that look like at policy level, at environmental level, at stakeholder level? And then actually, in terms of the opportunity itself, as you've just suggested there, well, what does that look like in the classroom or outside the classroom, in the playground and on the field? So those quick wins, those tiny habits, it's not necessarily just limited to what the teacher is doing physically with the children. It could be something at policy level, and those little tweaks. But in terms of that delivery in a classroom and that day to day, it's probably links to the Tiny Habits book by Professor Fogg, in that it's about finding for teachers, what do they do every single day anyway? So in their school day, what do they do? What's their real estate or property of their day? The register, lining up for playtime, going into the lunch hall, getting ready for the end of the day. But then in lessons, teachers also have things that they do religiously, habitually, every single day too, whether it's the structure of the lesson or a little routine to go and get something, things like that. So it could be, in terms of taking away from actually movement to support the learning, tick registers, walking to different areas of the school in an active way, leaving the classroom in an active way. If they're answering questions, they do it in an active way rather than standing up to answer a question or doing a bit of a movement to answer a question. These little things like that. But then when we're thinking about actual impacting the learning, it's if they're going to be doing something at their desk with whiteboards, what's to stop them being able to do that on the move, visiting other children around the classroom and writing things down, or visiting all the walls to record things and pin things up, or even just something as simple as collecting equipment rather than giving it to the children at the desks. It's how do we integrate, doesn't have to be vigorous, those movements to get children active and to learn better too. But then that's reinforced and backed up by that expectation at policy level. Is physical active learning embedded within subject policies? So is the maths lead, the science lead, the geography lead actually considering how can I support my staff to get children moving within these areas? So there's also, that could be a bigger thing, but there's also quick wins within the whole school system rather than just in the classroom.
There was a great example of one of the initial schools in Bradford where we were talking with the head teacher, and she just had a light bulb moment around the policy and the culture of the school. And she said, we've currently got 3 school rules, which were pretty traditional ones about being polite and being creative and those sorts of things. And she said, actually, all we need to do to change the culture is to bring in a new school rule, which is be active. And that was a real line in the sand because it showed the rest of the school, every classroom has now got this on the school wall laminated. It's one of our school rules. It's part of our culture and ethos. Absolutely nothing to do. Very little in terms of implementation or training. But the message it sent out to the rest of the school, the teachers, the kids, the community, we're an active school. It's one of our rules. And I think that is the small things we're talking about in terms of changing the culture and policy and ethos within a school setting.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and that's probably
definitely comes from the top, doesn't it, that whole leadership thing? The one, I don't want to go down a hole here, but I think most people are aware, those people who've been involved in education will know that typically a primary school teacher gets about a day's training on a teacher training year. And as a result, there is a kind of standoffish approach by, dare I say, the majority of primary school teachers when it comes to the teaching of PE. Now, although we're talking about creating a physically active environment within a school, I'm going to make an assumption that there are still going to be barriers there. And we've mentioned CPD and the need for that. Can we just go into a bit more detail on if my assumption is correct, what are the plans in order to get more people away from the culture side of things? How do we get more teachers confident, competent, more knowledgeable, and happy to go, do you know what, actually, now I understand this. It is a lot more simpler than probably what I am thinking, and I don't need to go and deliver a gymnastics lesson to a group of year 2 children.
The phrase, what gets measured gets managed, was coined by the American management consultant Pete Drucker over 40 years ago. Although there have been some alternatives to this phrase, one that resonates with me is what gets measured gets improved.
In recent years, this alternative phrase has gained popularity, emphasising the idea that measuring progress is crucial to achieving improvement.
Scorecards are a great way to highlight your strengths and identify blind spots in your organisation while providing instant, actionable steps on how you can improve that needs improving.
So, how does your organisation measure up?
Head to capscorecard.scoreapp.com and take approximately 5 minutes to answer some yes/no questions. Once you've done that, you will get an instant personalised report tailored to your organisation with clear, actionable steps. And it's totally free.
That's capscorecard.scoreapp.com, and the link will be in the show notes too.
I think one of the fundamental things in this, and Alex, perhaps you can evidence give some examples where I've seen it in practice. But one of the principles behind the Creating Active Schools framework is the COM-B model of behaviour change. That's Mitchie's piece of research that a lot of public health organisations use for interventions like smoking cessation and various other things. But it's a proven way of bringing in interventions or ways of working that do change behaviours. And the COM-B relates to various different elements that contribute to the B bit is the behaviour change. But the capability, opportunities and motivation are fundamental to change the behaviours. Now, I think in schools and in the education system, we've been very good at putting in opportunities into schools. The sports premium and school sports partnerships created lots and lots of opportunities for things to encourage to be more active, kids to be more active and play more sport. What we really haven't thought about very much is, again, the motivation behind it. So as you alluded to, you might have one or two really enthusiastic teachers teaching PE, but the rest of the staff aren't motivated to do it in the first place, maybe because of a bad experience they've had as a child or growing up, or they're interested in other things, culturally, arts, music, whatever. PE sport might not be their motivation and their driver. So that's where we really got to think about whether, as you said, it's through CPD or training or just looking at things through a different lens, but really understanding how the place that PE plays in a child's development goes far beyond just the sports hall or the field or the playground. You know, we were talking right at the very beginning around our social relationships and our confidence in ourselves and our teamwork, all the softer holistic skills that come out of having that good relationship, that physical literacy, that good relationship with sport. And I think that's where we need to position it to work with those teachers in terms of PE. I don't know, Alex, if you've got anything that you've seen that epitomizes that.
Yeah, I think it is actually it can often be a reflection of the culture if perhaps it's recognized that high quality PE isn't taking place within a school. It can often be a reflection that physical education, physical activity, school sport maybe isn't prioritized and part of the culture within that school. Because I would argue, and what we're seeing through changes and the impact of the Creating Active Schools framework is that, okay, we are going to prioritize physical activity, and PE might be something that we're wanting to embed as part of the culture. Because I would say, so one of the best people to actually deliver that CPD and that coaching and mentoring is the existing physical education lead, whose role it is to actually do that. But we still see far too many schools, unfortunately, who aren't giving their P leader the time to actually come out of class and actually provide that support and be that role and do that. When we also have the P Sport Premium funding sitting there that facilitates schools to be able to actually get the teacher out of class to do that. We are seeing schools now, some creating active schools, who are putting really strong CPD pathways in school through for physical education. And rather it being a tick box, we'll do 1 hour's worth of CPD for our teachers once every couple of years. There's actually a consistent and regular termly or half-termly CPD pathway where P leaders are coming out of class and actually coaching and mentoring and quality assuring and things like that, which is really important as well in terms of those schools that are engaging with coaching companies and wider organizations who come in to actually to ensure that the curriculum is being delivered to the best it can and supporting them with that too. And there's, should any listeners be interested, particularly in terms of that P leader role, there's been some really good research coming out of Sheffield Hallam University from Kim Longburn, who's actually dug deep into the workload and the workload of the P leader and done some research there on how to prioritize that. And there's some fascinating findings through her focus groups around just the scope and the breadth and the huge amount of actions and responsibilities a P leader has. And that they have to do in an academic year multiple times. And when are they getting the time to do this? We've got some funding there to support it. And I would argue that has to be part of the culture, is to give them that opportunity to do the role they've been asked to do.
Amazing. And in terms of getting CAS out there more and more, and hopefully get as many schools and organizations involved as possible, if organizations and leaders are listening to this episode and they want to get involved, what does that process typically look like?
I would suggest the first action would be to try and hunt down the initial piece of research around creating active schools. And I'm sure if you Google creating active schools, Andy Daly Smith research article, you'll be able to find that and give it a read. We do have a website, creatingactiveschools.org, which has got some further information. But there's fundamentally two parts of the CAS equation here to discuss. There's the framework, which is free to everybody to use, to take it away and really understand and learn and embed some of those behavior change principles around embedding physical activity at the heart of a school's culture, ethos and policies. And I think anyone can take that away and learn in their own time or contact us, and we'll be more than happy to have those conversations. But what we've learned from schools is they often want something a bit more tangible. If they really want to put some effort into this and work it up and embed these behaviors in their schools, then we have worked with, again, Sport England and the Jump project in Bradford to create an online system that will take schools through this journey of profiling, answering a load of questions to ascertain where your strengths and gaps are. And the system automatically then helps them produce an action plan, which is aligned to bespoke, specific CPD that we've developed about all the different areas of the CAS framework, whether it's active travel or active learning or curriculum or playtimes or whatever, to help them really embed various different elements of the framework. So I would say the first step, if the schools are interested or companies, organizations are interested in that, is to contact your local active partnership, because that's the structure that we're working through at the moment. If the active partnership isn't working on creating active schools, and most of them are in one way or another, then absolutely get in touch with myself or Alex through the website. Our details will be on there, and we'd be more than happy to have a conversation. Is that okay, Alex? Is there anything else in addition to that?
No, I don't think so. I think in terms of, the next steps for anybody listening, that would absolutely be the case. And we're seeing schools working with organizations from the wider sector in different ways as a result of implementing the framework. There is certainly a role to play. So please do reach out if you're interested.
Amazing. And then in terms of the next 3 to 5 years, what do you see CAS looking like in 3 to 5 years' time?
The moonshot there would be every school in the country or even across the world embedding creating active schools methodology. We're working with schools in other countries across Europe. So we have had interest from afar, but I think it'd be great in 3 to 5 years if we have, say, for example, the Department for Education and Ofsted aligned an understanding that physical activity in schools should be advocated because of the vast benefits that it brings children, young people. Just an understanding, a culture change to embrace the importance of being active. How that's done in schools, it's up to the schools to decide whether they embrace the Creating Active Schools framework or if there's another locally developed piece of work that does the same or a national not important. The important thing is that the culture changes, the system changes so that physical activity is embedded in schools and seen as a good thing, not a distraction or, as Alex said, an additional time constraint. I think we're focusing our efforts on working at a policy level with DFE and other influential organisations in that level so that schools are really understanding the importance of this.
And linked with that understanding, you've already mentioned, I think both of you, different people, different bits of research around what we've discussed today. If listeners do want to know a bit more, do want to learn, obviously you've got your website, but are there any individual people or bits of research or podcasts even that you would recommend them researching into and taking a bit of a closer look at?
I think we've mentioned, obviously, one of the co-founders of the framework, Andy Daly-Smith. So there are a number of international articles that Andy Daly-Smith and his team have written around whole school physical activity implementation approaches and also specifically around physically active learning too. So I certainly would recommend reaching out and taking a look at those. I mentioned earlier there is no current, obviously, Creating Active Schools podcast or anything like that, but I mentioned, I think my little bit of a go-to is the Physical Activity Researcher podcast. I think that's always some really interesting interviews and the latest research coming out around physical activity in its broadest sense. We're a big fan of over here in Yorkshire of Ryan Ellis and his PE Umbrella podcast, obviously. PE being one opportunity area within a wider Creating Active Schools framework. But in terms of physical education specifically, he has some wonderful guests on his PE Umbrella podcast. And then in terms of a couple of books I mentioned earlier, Tiny Habits from Professor BJ Fogg. I love that one, and it's very transferable to and relatable to the teaching profession and to education as well, and embedding those professional habits in school and how that can be linked to physical activity. And then we've got the wonderful, again, thinking about another opportunity area of the framework, curriculum lessons that aren't PE and how to embed active learning approaches. There's the wonderful team from Move and Learn, Bryn Llewellyn and Ian Holmes, who've got a fantastic book that supports schools to embed active learning as part of the whole school culture. So I'd recommend checking out the Move and Learn book too. Yeah.
And one last, I was talking to Alex about this earlier. It's always the case that the book you've most recently read is the most important book you've ever read, isn't it? And I've literally just finished reading Stephen Bartlett's Diary of a CEO, which is fantastic because it's really accessible, really simply put, doesn't labor the point. And some of these books can have an idea and then spend 400 pages just rewriting the same idea using different words. But this has got about, 30, 40 short chapters around different ways of changing your lifestyle, changing your leadership style, changing your organization to be more efficient and more effective. A lot of them might not be relevant, but there's definitely going to be half a dozen real nuggets of takeaway advice that I know I've learned from, that I definitely advocate for anyone else, even education settings, to read it and to hopefully get some really good advice from that as well.
Great stuff. Plenty there for people to be getting stuck into. Thanks so much, guys. Really appreciate your time. the work you're doing is amazing. I think the work will continue to only go in one direction. And I think your 3 to 5 year plan, with the support of everybody in the space, will only come to fruition. I think of the impact it's having. We need to bang the drum, as I said earlier. Don't we? Just need to keep talking about it, remain positive. There's going to be no doubt. There's going to be a few barriers along the way, but there isn't any journey. I think it's just important that we collaboratively keep working and moving forwards and making a difference. Yeah, thanks so much for your time. I wish you all the very best. If people do want to get in touch with you guys, what we will do actually is put the links that you've mentioned, we'll add onto the show notes. But individually, if they want to get in touch with you, where's the best place to do that?
Yep. So in terms of an email address, is that okay?
Email or any social platforms? Yeah.
Yeah. So my email is my Yorkshire Sport one. So that's alex.ogden, OGDEN, at yorkshiresport.org. I have a Twitter handle of Alex_Ogden25 as well.
I thought you were going to say Alex Ogden AVFC then, Alex.
Nah.
Sorry, Dan. I had to get that in.
Sorry to disrupt the Aston Villa love in there. There's a Twitter for creating active schools as well, which is
of course
we_R_CAS. It's not that it doesn't roll off the tongue, but I'm sure if you search for it, it'll come up.
That's great. Thanks so much, guys. Really appreciate you giving us your time, and take care and speak soon.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you. Take care.
Brilliant. Good stuff. After Alex's shameless self-promotion.
I don't know what to ask. This is the only one that came to my mind in terms of contacting me. I thought, how else did they do it? I completely forgot about the CAS one.
To subscribe to the pod, search for the Active Code on your podcast app. Let's work together to get more people more active more often.